This damage scales with spell power, and its crit chance is spell-based. Flame Tongue scales with weapon speed, which means it will incur more damage per swing the slower the weapon is. Its strengths are the fire portion ignores armor, so for higher armor targets, this may be a better choice. It also has high consistency. It's also potentially better if you're an elemental shaman if you're stacking bonus spell damage gear. If you are, you may get a lot more out of it, considering that you may have to use it to finish off mobs after hitting them with lightning bolts. Weaknesses is, of course, it's affected by fire resistance, so if you're fighting a mob that is fire resistant, you will do less or no damage. And it does not benefit from any melee attack power or crit. So the white hit portion, of course, will benefit from the melee attack power or crit, but the Flame Tongue portion will not. I've calculated the minimum and maximum damage for each rank of Flame Tongue weapon, as well as the spell coefficient, and it receives 15% of any bonus damage that you have. Frostbrand weapon is a magical damage enhancement as well. It has a chance to add a static frost damage bonus to each melee attack. And this also scales with spell power and spell crit. It also scales with weapon speed, but in a different way than Flame Tongue. Flame Tongue produces more static damage with the increase of weapon speed. Frostbrand has a higher chance to proc the slower the weapon speed. From my testing and other testing I found from other sources, the proc chance is about 8 to 9 times per minute, regardless of weapon speed. If it procs, it also reduces the movement speed of the target by 25%. Remember, this does not stack with Earthbind or Frost Shock. If you implement Earthbind or Frost Shock, the slow will be 50%, since Earthbind and Frost Shock have higher slows, but it won't be 75%. The strength of Frostband is that the Frost procs ignore armor just in the same way Flame Tongue does, so it may be better for higher armor targets. It's a consistent slow if Earthbind Totem or Frost Shock are not available, meaning that if you have to use another Earth Totem and you have to use another Shock, you always have this as a way to slow your target. It also has intermediate burst potential. It isn't the most bursty of the weapon enhancements, but it definitely holds its own. This is also, just like Flame Tongue, potentially better for casters, as it does benefit from spell power and spell crit. The weaknesses are, it's affected by frost resistance, so if you're fighting a frost resistant mob, you will not want to use it. It's inconsistent, meaning that you're not sure if it's going to proc or not. Finally, it does not benefit from melee attack power or crit. As with Flame Tongue, the white hit portion does benefit from attack power and melee crit, but the Frostbrand proc does not. I've calculated the plus damage for each of the ranks and the spell coefficient. Frostbrand receives more of magical damage than Flame Tongue with a spell coefficient of 25%. Finally, everyone's favorite Wind Fury weapon. In full transparency, this is actually my least favorite shaman weapon enhancement. It's a physical damage enhancement, has a 20% chance per swing to cause 2 additional attacks. And each of these 2 additional attacks will receive additional melee attack power that increases with rank. The strengths are that it has incredible burst potential. And I'll be the first to say, even though it's not my favorite enhancement, that seeing Wind Fury crits always makes my day. It has no internal cooldown with Passive WoW, meaning that each swing can potentially proc Wind Fury. However, Wind Fury cannot proc off of the additional hits that it produces. This used to be the case back in early vanilla, I think before patch 1.4, but this was fixed because that meant that theoretically Wind Fury can happen in a chain reaction and never stop. And I'm sure there were some salty people that were on the receiving end of something like that. Another strength is that if it does proc, those 2 additional hits, if they crit, they can proc Flurry, which can kind of work synergistically to produce more Wind Furies. Now, the weakness is that it's, in my opinion, incredibly inconsistent. It never procs when you need it to, and I believe the Frostbrand is much more consistent compared to Wind Fury. Another weakness is that the additional hits it produces are not guaranteed to hit. They can be mitigated or missed. It's also poor against high armor targets, just like Rockbiter, in that all of its damage is physical. To the right, I've calculated the attack power bonuses for each rank. Also, there is no spell coefficient because Wind Fury is purely physical. So there's 4 options here. Which one's the best? Many of you are going to think that the answer lies within weapon speed, or there's a large group of you that just say Wind Fury and that's it because of the large crit potential. But the data I'm about to show you may contradict a lot of those points. But before we get into that, I want to show you the statistical method I used to analyze weapon buff data. I'm going to use an example, and you're probably going to think, Meldoran's lost his mind. Why are there pictures of marathon runners and sumo wrestlers with an orc in a Warcraft presentation? But let me use this real-life example to kind of explain myself. So we have 5 runners on the left, and we have 5 sumo wrestlers on the right. If I asked you, is the average weight between these groups different, you'd probably all laugh at me and say, of course. Marathon runners are running all the time, they probably have low fat, and the sumo wrestlers are intentionally eating to get themselves larger, fatter. Not to say they're not muscular, but they do that as part of their training. I have real data have 5 runners' weights and I have 5 sumo wrestlers' weights. You see those weight in the tables below. And this is actual data, and you'll see the green arrow and red arrow. And those arrows represent the range of data, or the spread of the data. And then I also calculate the averages. So we have 147.8 for runners and 335.2 for sumo wrestlers. Now, it doesn't take an Einstein to realize that those are very different numbers, but that's not good enough for statistics and scientific experiments. We have to have a statistical basis to clearly state whether two groups are actually different and whether the averages are different. And the way we do that is by analyzing the variance, or how much the data deviates from that mean, and in what way it deviates. So that's called an analysis of variance, or an ANOVA for short. So, do sumos and runners weigh different amounts? Looking at this data, you can see that it's overwhelmingly yes. In the box plot below, and what a box plot does is it lets you visualize the range of data. The runner is in brown and the sumos are in blue. And you'll notice that those box plots don't overlap. And you can see the ranges also don't overlap. I kept the same colors. I kept the green arrow and the red arrow to show you that their ranges are nowhere near each other. So there's weight on the y-axis, the vertical one going from 100 to 400, and then we have body type on the x. We separate runner and sumo, and those are very different from each other. So in science, a lot of times what we do is we put letters on top of the actual box plots. If the letters are the same, so let's pretend that runner and sumo were both A's, that means they're not different from each other. And usually I would put A and B, but since most of you guys probably don't look at these kind of graphs a lot, I put A and O, which is the same thing, and I made it look like we're comparing apples to oranges, which is a saying in the United States that we say, if you're not comparing two things that are the same, we say you're comparing apples to oranges. So in this actual scenario, with this actual data, we actually are, these things are very different from each other. But that's just a visual representation. What about the statistics? And in fact, those letters, A and O, were assigned because of a statistical test that I ran, not just because I thought they looked visually different from each other. So in that gray image to the right underneath my favorite actor of all time, Nicolas Cage, which I'm being very facetious about that, you'll see I circled a number. That number is called a p-value. And the number is 3.5e negative 06. And all that means is that that's 3.5 times 10 to the negative 6th power. That's a very, very small number. In scientific fields, if our p-value is below 0.05, we say that that result is significant. That is a very well-used cutoff. So if it's below that number, we say that the two groups are different. Our number is 0.000000365. That is a very, very small p-value, and that just goes to show you how confident we are that these two groups are different. So the reason I'm showing you this is I'm going to use the same approach to analyze Shaman Weapon Buff DPS as a function of weapon speed. So if you scour the internet and you type in which weapon buff should I use in an LOL, or when should I use Flame Tongue, when should I use Rockbiter, when should I use Wind Fury, there are many, many Reddit posts, forum posts, guides that explain that the faster your weapon is, you should use Flame Tongue. The slower your weapon is, you should use Wind Fury or Rockbiter, because Flame Tongue scales better with faster weapons, and Rockbiter and Wind Fury scale with slower weapons. I'm here to tell you that that data and that conclusion is not accurate. My data shows that the weapon buffs were designed to scale with weapon speed at the same or near the same rate. Now, I know you're going to think I'm crazy and this is wrong and all of these other things, but you have to realize that I did 560 independent tests to test this. I did 140 tests within each weapon buff across 28 different weapon speeds, and I did 5 replicates per speed. And what I'm showing you here is that we have DPS on the Y, we have each of the weapon enhancements on the X. Look at the spreads, look how much they overlap. Remember that sumo wrestler versus runner comparison I showed you? Each of these variances overlap. The green arrow showed that, and the p-values in the top right we had a 0.19. That is not significant at all, it's not even close. And this is averaged across all weapon speeds. Also, those tiny little gray bars inside the green arrows show you Rockbiter, which is the most consistent compared to all other weapon buffs. You'll notice that the green double arrow next to Rockbiter, there's a small red bar inside. That's the Rockbiter consistency spread. And I copied that to all the other weapon buffs to show you that Flame Tongue is a little bit less consistent, but Frostbrand and Wind Fury are much less consistent. They're more the variable weapon buffs and have the largest spread. What this data shows is that it doesn't matter which weapon buff you use, at least over the long term. Of course, there'll be certain scenarios where one weapon buff will be better than the other. Now, I use the highest rank weapon buff to test this because it's very hard to say which rank of Rockbiter compares to which rank of Flame Tongue. So I'm assuming that the highest rank should be the best for comparison purposes because it's the highest rank available. So that was data that's averaged across all weapon speeds. Now let's look within weapon speeds. Now let's say a very busy plot, but let me explain what's happening here. Weapon speed is on the x-axis, going from 1.3, which is the fastest weapon you can get as a shaman, up to 4.0, which is the slowest. And on the y-axis is DPS. Each of the colored lines represent a different weapon buff. Green is Rockbiter, the red-orange is Flametongue, light blue is Frostbrand, and purple is Windfury. Do not look at the change in DPS over the course of weapon speed. That is not what I'm testing here. The reason why I use the line chart like this is because imagine showing you guys 28 different box plots. It's just too much. If you see a change in DPS, like the shift you see between weapon speed 2.9 and 3.0, that is because I tried my hardest to use weapons in each of those tests that were around the same DPS. It's a lot harder than you think to craft a test with the same exact DPS each time. Weapon DPSs are variable and so are their bonuses, so it's hard to normalize DPS over 28 different weapon speeds. I did my best, but what you are looking for are within the dotted lines. Those are the weapon speed comparisons. And you're looking at the spread between the 4 black dots, or the 4 colored lines, whatever we're going to look at it. Let's look at like 1.3 weapon speed, which is the fastest. You'll see that I drew that little blue bracket, and that shows the range of the difference in DPS. It's only about 5 DPS difference across all of those weapon buffs. And 5 DPS at level 60, the level of my character I use to do this analysis, is very small. Now, we went over this ANOVA things. I did an ANOVA for each of those 28 different weapon speeds, and none of them came out significant. So there is no statistical significant difference for each weapon buff DPS in all of those weapon speeds. And there are 2 other big results we can take out of this. So I talked about ranges, and I said 1.3, it's about a 5 DPS range between top and bottom. The average range across all weapon speeds is only 4.8 DPS. Very, very small amount. And what's even more interesting is that there are no detectable trends. Flametongue doesn't get worse as weapon speed increases, and Rockbiter doesn't get better, or Windfury doesn't get better. They're all about the same. They switch up and down for which one's better and which one's worse. And if I do this 100 more times, it's going to just get more converged. These values are converging. It goes to show these weapon buffs are designed to create player choice and are designed to scale relatively the same way. So those are pretty interesting results in my opinion, and really shattered my preconceived notions of these weapon buffs. And this all started by Deathcamp and I dueling. I just let him hit me, and I noticed that the DPSs were so close for Flametongue and Rockbiter and Frostbrand. So literally just dueling made me do this test. And I just want to say that don't take things for face value when you hear them. If you hear something, don't just say, okay, that's got to be how it is. Go out and test it. And I have to teach myself that as well. I should have done that a long time ago. But I'm glad I did it now, and I want to thank Deathcamp for bringing this up. Now, the raw data I used to do these analyses, the weapon buff times, and also the spell coefficients, all that data will be available in the description in a Google Sheets. So if you want to look at this data yourself, you can do that. So let's go over some previous results I already showed. So this may corroborate
It's early, but I sleep early.
what I've showed in previous leveling videos. And my Shadow Leveling Guide
Early
Part
evening.
1 actually did a similar test with Flametongue versus Windfury. And even though
I'm
Windfury
trying to
did more
study.
total damage, the difference was not significant.
Can
So
you
that
see
actually
it? And my
corroborates what
big
I
head
showed
is
in
in
the
the way.
previous slide. However, in Shadow Leveling Guide Part 2, I did Time to Kill, 20 hippogriffs with a bunch of different builds and weapon enhancements. And you'll see that like hybrid Windfury weapon and hybrid Flametongue weapon, hybrid Windfury was faster than Flametongue. But this was only one replicate, and I'm in the process of fixing that. I'm in the process of doing another leveling guide where I'll be doing 5 replicates for Time to Kill, and I'll see really then if the differences actually come out. So I'm eager to see how that comes out. I would take my Part 2 analysis where I'm showing the kill times with a grain of salt. And I wouldn't do that for builds, so I wouldn't do that for elemental versus hybrid, but I would do it perhaps within hybrid, Flametongue versus Windfury. There's just too much noise that can happen in one replicate, and I'm probably capturing too much variation. So I just wanted to go over some previous results and how these new data interact with my old data. Okay, so if weapon buff doesn't matter, what does matter? And there are 7 things to take into consideration
Oh, yeah.
with a certain weapon buff. And the first is armor class. Remember, if you're going against a high armor target, you want to use those magical weapon buffs like Flametongue and Frostbrand because that
I'm not the
magical damage
artist.
bypasses armor. The next thing you have to consider is time of
But
engagement.
thank you.
How long are you going to be fighting? And if it's a PvP situation or you're duo leveling where mobs are dying really quick, or in PvP where you want to
Do you
just
play
some
WoW?
burst damage, you're going to put on Windfury or Frostbrand, right? You want to see if you can get those Windfury crits. The shorter the engagement time, the more variation can be captured. It's like I said with that whole thing, the previous slide, I only did 1 replicate and I was probably capturing too much variation. Well, variation can occur in short time spans. So you may put on Windfury and engage with someone and kill them in 3 seconds, right? Do you want to roll the dice? Do you want to have consistency? And also think about interaction with other abilities, like Flurry is a good example. In In the test I didn't use any talents, so I didn't put talents in Flurry. However, Wind Fury can work synergistically with Flurry. I don't think it's going to make a difference over the course of your leveling. I think everything will even out in the end. But in shorter fights or in PvP skirmishes, remember that Wind Fury procs, the additional hits that proc off Wind Fury can also proc Flurry. So you can have more Flurry chances with Wind Fury. The next thing to consider, are you soloing or in a party? If you're by yourself, Rockbiter can be used. You're not worrying about pulling thread off someone. And Rockbiter is very consistent. It's the most consistent weapon buff I tested. Also, if you're tanking, you're going to use Rockbiter. So what's the role you're playing, right? And Frostbrand's great if mobs are going to run a lot. It doesn't cost any additional mana once you put Frostbrand on your target, right? So the chance of it proccing will slow your targets down. And those pesky mobs that like to run away, instead of wasting all that mana on a Frost Shock or sacrificing your Earth Totem for an Earthbind, you can use Frostbrand instead. The next, are you an Elemental Shaman? Are you stacking spell power and crit? If you are, the magical buffs will probably be better for you because they'll do more damage. Something that I did not take into consideration for this test is spell power. Since most Shaman are going to level enhancement, I don't think taking spell power over strength of agility is worth it. It's not that much of a difference, but since you're already stacking it anyway as elemental, it may be better to use as weapon buffs if you're an elemental Shaman. Next are resistances. You're not going to go use Flame Tongue against a fire elemental. You're going to use another one. Keep in consideration that resistances are a thing.
That doesn't make any sense.
If you're worried about resistances, use one of the physical damage ones.
Why doesn't that look right?
Or Rockbiter. Or if you're not going against someone that has any kind of resistance, you can use the magical buffs. Number 6, this is purely theoretical. Which buff was the most recently trained? Since I showed that at max rank it doesn't matter, it may matter during the leveling process. What I mean by that is you
This
make
is
a
a pretty good
Rockbiter,
app.
and then 2 or 4 levels later you get a new Flame Tongue.
Live Me is a pretty good app also.
More total damage than the Rockbiter you just got. I'm not sure if that's true, but if you have nothing to lose, you might as well give it a shot.
There's a lot of them.
Last but not least, perhaps the most important.
Depends on what you want.
What is your personal preference? Do you like rolling the dice? Do you like seeing big hits? Or do you like consistency? Do you like seeing that extra little fire damage tick? Or do you like seeing your enemy turn blue and slow down when Frostbrand procs? Maybe you just like the color of the Frostbrand animation on your weapon. It really comes down to personal preference.
Thank you for visiting.
And this data shows that you can use what you want. So do that. Okay, now let's move on to lightning spells. We talked about weapon buffs. We talked about shocks. Another core part of the Shaman's DPS toolbox comes in the form of lightning spells. This includes Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, but it also includes, let's not forget, Lightning Shield. Now, all of these belong to the Nature School and will do nature damage. And the damage of these spells can be increased via spell power and talents. Also, Critical Strike is spell-based, either going from Intellect, Spell Crit, or Talents, except Lightning Shield, which cannot crit. If you're an Elemental Shaman, Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning are your bread and butter for sure. Now, all these talents here will affect both your Lightning Bolt and your Chain Lightning spells. We can increase our Critical Strike via Call of Thunder Elemental Fury. We can reduce our mana cost via Convection. We can reduce our cast time via Lightning Mastery. We can increase our damage by Convection and increase our range by Storm's Reach. Now, all of these are in the Elemental trait, but we can also increase our Critical Strike chance via the Title Mastery talent in
I think it depends on where you're
now,
at
to remember,
and who you're trying to connect with.
Of course, a lightning spell, but none of these talents will affect it. Let's take a look at our first lightning spell and our most commonly used one, Lightning Bolt.
What language are you going to be
using? Which can increase to 40 yards with Storm's Reach. Has a cast time of 1.5 to 3 seconds, and 3 seconds starts coming in at rank 4 and above. Rank 4 and below, the cast times are smaller. And it deals nature damage on hit. One of the strengths of Lightning Bolt is a high damage output. Not as high as Chain Lightning, but still has a very high damage output and is a great spell to use in most circumstances. It has no cooldown and has a much higher DPME than Chain Lightning if you're using it on a single target. Now the weaknesses. Many mobs and bosses have nature resistance, and this is one reason why Elemental Shamans are not great in raids, and the other reason because of the mana cost of the spells. And that leads us into our second weakness, that Lightning Bolt is mana expensive over time, and it must be heavily downranked in longer raid encounters. Finally, Lightning Bolt is very talent dependent. If you saw my Shaman leveling video part 2, you'll see that if you take a Shaman without any of the elemental talents, and you cast lightning
Some
spells,
of the other ones are hard. I
However,
tried to
if
get
you
into
take
WeChat,
elemental
and it
talents,
was
the ones I
really
showed in the previous
difficult.
slide, it is the fastest way to level. So that difference comes from the
I got
talents
into
alone.
VK,
Lightning Bolt itself is a powerful spell, but it becomes
which
so much
is more
powerful
Russian
when you put
based,
talents
but
into the elemental tree. Now, for the
it's
spell
fun.
coefficient for Lightning Bolt, we would expect by theory if we divide 3 by 3.5, which is, remember, 3.5 is the default cast speed, or the reference cast speed. Well, we expect it at 86%, we get something very close to 87%. So your Lightning Bolt spells will get between 86 to 87% of your total spell power. Now for something really strange. So you know Lightning Bolt ranks 1 through 3 are less than 3 seconds. So theory would dictate that if we take those cast speeds and divide by 3.5, we would get varying percentages. 1.5 seconds, you get about 43%. 2 seconds, you get 57%. And 2.5, you get 71%. However, the data does not show that. We do not get that. So it seems like that 3.5 second reference, and then you're dividing cast speed by that cast speed is only for max rank. Lower rank spells are penalized in some way, and they deviate from what we expect theory-wise. So Lightning Bolt rank 1 only gets 12%, rank 2 gets 30%, rank 3 gets 54%. Keep that in mind when you're downranking during raid or PvP encounters, that you're not getting the maximal impact of your spell power, even when you take cast speed into account. Now, just to make sure this wonky spell coefficient thing didn't scale with rank, I also tested this with rank 4, which is the first 3-second Lightning Bolt cast, and it performs exactly as we expect. Theory-wise, 86% of your spell power goes to it at rank 4. So it would seem that you only get what you expect theory-wise if you go to the spell's maximum trainable cast time. Anything before that, it doesn't scale the way we would expect theory-wise. So keep that in mind when you're downranking any spell with any class in the game. I don't know 100% if this will also follow in other classes, but I'm expecting that it probably would. Okay, let's move on to Chain Lightning. This is also a nature spell. Has a 30-yard range untalented. Has a 2.5-second cast time untalented, and that remains for all ranks. And this deals nature damage at a range on hit, and then it can jump up to 2 additional targets. Each of those jumps reduces the previous damage by 30%. It is important to remember that each jump of Chain Lightning has its own chance to crit. The crit chance of subsequent jumps has nothing to do with if the first hit actually crit. Just keep that in mind. Now, the first strength of this spell is that it has the highest DPME if it hits 3 targets. If it doesn't, you're kind of losing out on that mana expenditure. It has very high burst potential. Chain Lightning crits can really decimate a PvP team, or can really have a high impact in DPS. It has great combo potential with Lightning Bolt and Shock. So if you cast Lightning Bolt, which has a travel time, Chain Lightning does not have a travel time, so you can cast Lightning Bolt while Lightning Bolt's going to your enemy, and you have the reduced casting time. You can start casting Chain Lightning that can hit at the same time, followed with a shock of some kind for extreme burst DPS. That's why Elemental Shaman are feared in PvP battlegrounds, because of their ability to perform high burst damage very quickly. The weaknesses are that it has a 6-second cooldown, so you can't just keep chain casting it. Just like Lightning Bolt, many mobs and bosses have nature resistance, and it's very talent dependent, just like Lightning Bolt. And finally, it is very mana expensive, even more mana expensive than Lightning Bolt. So you're not going to use it in PvE scenarios, you're just going to keep casting Lightning Bolt. And in PvP situations, just make sure you have enough mana to cast it, and then you can regen mana between skirmishes. Now, the spell coefficient is just what we expect theory-wise. A 2.5-second cast should receive about 71% of your spell power, and with my tests, I got the same value. So let's move on to Lightning Shield. This is a self-cast buff. It also provides nature damage. It can be ranged or melee. So if a melee attacker hits you, it can hit them. If a ranged target hits you, it will also hit them. Its cast time is instant and lasts 10 minutes. And what it does is it inflicts static amount of nature damage to an attacker, melee or range, and this can only happen every 3 seconds or so. If someone is hitting you, all 3 charges of Lightning Shield won't go off. It happens every 2 to 3 seconds. Now, the damage of Lightning Shield can be increased via improved Lightning Shield talent, which is in the enhancement tree, but it can also be increased via spell power. And just remember that Lightning Shield cannot critically strike. The first strength of Lightning Shield is that it has a high DPME. It is actually more efficient than Flame Shock. It may produce less total damage if it's untalented, but it does have a higher DPME. The really cool thing about Lightning Shield is that it's the only Shaman ability in the game that you can proactively store damage. It's very unique in that way. You click it, you put it on yourself, you can start regenerating mana walking through the world, and that essentially can make it even more mana efficient. Let's say you just killed a mob, you're near full mana, you put Lightning Shield on, and as you're walking to the next mob, you get back up to full cap mana. That spell was just free. So you can think of it that way too. It's a way to proactively store damage. And lastly, it's an instant cast with no cooldown, which is really nice. You can keep refreshing it over a fight. I don't recommend it. This is not very mana efficient.
Are you a WoW player?
There are 2 big weaknesses to Lightning Shield, and the first is, just like all the lightning spells, many bosses and mobs have nature resistance. And secondly, you have to be hit for that damage to go out. If you're in a raid setting, and you're not being targeted, and there's not a lot of damage going out, it's not going to tick very often. The same thing can be said in dungeons. If you're a Shaman DPSing in dungeons, most of the damage will be taken by the tank, so Lightning Shield is not a regular source of DPS. For spell coefficient, Lightning Shield receives 33% of your total spell power, and that's for each orb. So each orb receives 33% of your spell power. So
are you planning on playing WoW?
Cover lightning, let's talk about the healing spells. These are also integral parts of the Shaman toolkit. So Shaman heals, except for Healing Stream Totem, are nature-based. Healing Stream Totem is actually a frost-based spell. So
my day was pretty good. Kind of tiring. I worked my day job.
Nature-based spells, depending on the type type of silence.
And yours?
Put on you. Healing can be
What did you do
increased
with your
by
day?
spell power plus healing
Amine
gear and
Auba
talents. And
17.
critical strike chance is also spell-based and can be increased by intellect, spell crit, healing crit, and talents. It is important to remember that Healing Stream Totem cannot critically heal. And while we're on the topic, Chain Heal is the most used healing spell you'll use in endgame PvE situations as a shaman. So make sure you know Chain Heal, you love Chain Heal, because everyone else does. These four talents will increase the effectiveness and or efficacy of your healing spells, not Healing Stream Totem.
Did you guys eat when you were at the beach?
Strength, Healing Raise can reduce up by 15%. Mana cost can be reduced by a Tidal Focus. Critical Strike chance can be increased by a Tidal Mastery, and Healing Power can be increased by Purification. These are all in the Restoration tree. In addition to these talents, Healing Wave also has talents that specifically increase its power. Well then, let's get right into Healing Wave. So Healing Wave is a nature-based heal, has a 40-yard range, has a 1.5 to 20 second cast time.
This is only my second time streaming.
Rank 4 have a shorter cast time. Rank 4 and above
I don't know what you're asking about. I want natural. My mustache.
There are two talents that are Healing Wave specific that can reduce its cast time and also increase its power. Improved Healing Wave reduces the cast time of Healing Wave by 0.5 seconds with each rank up to 0.5 seconds, making it a 2.5 second cast at max rank. The other talent is Healing Way, which is a chance of increasing the effectiveness of your next Healing Wave on the target by 6%, and that can stack up to 3 times. If you put 3 points in the Healing Way, it's a guaranteed effect. So if you heal a target, subsequent Healing Wave spells will be increased on the target by 6%, and that will stack up to 3 times. You can get up to 80%, and that buff lasts 15 seconds, and it can keep reapplying itself if you keep casting Healing Wave.
But I still can't decide between I still can't decide between a troll and a orc. So I don't know what kind of boobs they would be. I can't visualize. I can't complete the visualization yet.
Healing Wave rank 10 is only attainable via AQ20 by either doing the raid itself or by buying the tablet from the auction house. And finally, the spell coefficient for a 3-second Healing Wave is exactly what you would think. Theoretically, at 86%.
But thank you for the compliment.
Plus healing or spell power goes towards healing.
Shaman. So what I'm looking at, what I'm watching are videos on, well, they would be your boobs right now on this one. It's such a convincing argument. My God. I had never thought of it that way. To show the bobs or not show the bobs? No. I'm studying to play a shaman, and I'm thinking I'm going to be a troll shaman when WoW re-releases Classic WoW, so I can heal my husband while he's playing warrior. And that's what I'm watching videos on. I mean, I'm pretty sure shamans would like boobs. Like, they like nature. So I don't see why they would be against it. So I don't know who said that this was a democracy. I didn't take up a vote. There's only 5 people. Although everybody's wonderful for joining. I don't remember anybody else voting. Oh, tarot card reading. I don't know. Target 3 does not have to be in 12.5 yard range of target 1. What is my vote? I'm disgusting, so I should never vote. I shouldn't vote. Also, just keep in mind, just like Chain Lightning, I should go to bed. I've got like 30 minutes left of this video to watch about chain healing. It's actually early. Chain Heal can go outside of parties. It's very, very unique, and it's very, very important. And finally, is an excellent multi-target healing spell. The only really weakness is that it's only a mana efficient if you're healing multiple targets. So make sure you're not using Chain Heal unless you need to heal multiple targets. It sounds pretty stupid to say that, but just don't use it if you're only healing one guy. At a 2.5 second cast, theory-wise, we expect it to get about 71% of your total spell power, and in my test, I achieved 72%. So very, very close to where we'd expect.
What?
Finally, let's go over Healing Stream Totem. This is an
Yay.
oddball. It's a Frost School Totem. It has a 20-yard range on
So,
Talon. Has an instant
Juki Halik, you're guessing fortunes?
This is an AoE static.
That's very nice of you.
Wide, and it takes every 2 seconds. The strengths are it's the most mana efficient heal in all of Classic WoW. Even more mana efficient in
What?
the party. If you're healing 5 targets in rank 1, the HPME is
Oh, I don't know why you call
that is
yourself
an order of magnitude higher than any
dumb.
other heal in the entire game. And this is great when there's consistent party-wide damage going out. However, the biggest weakness
I have friends who did it,
nowhere
who've
near
done
as
it.
beneficial
It's
as
cool.
Mana Spring Totem, especially if you're in a healer or caster group.
Especially if you have a good card set.
So it has its uses.
A fun one.
Unfortunately, it's
There was a
really
One
overshadowed
Piece
by
one that I wanted.
It gets 2% of your plus healing or plus spell damage. And there are 3 talents which can increase its effectiveness. Restorative Totem increases its effect by 25%.
You wouldn't be the first or the last
Mastery
one.
increases its range from 20 to 30 yards.
A challenge of what?
Reduces the mana cost of this totem by 25% in max rank. Now let's move on to the fire totems. For these totems, I just provide the DPME and spell.
I can imagine what the illustration is
Because
going to be.
I've already went into
I really like the One Piece one. I think it was only one set, but man, the cards are really pretty.
I recommend checking out that guide.
Make things
Now,
up.
fire totems scale with spell power and spell crit, except magma totem, which cannot crit. So that's something to keep in mind. But all of the additional power that these totems can get are coming from your spell power and/or your spell crit by intellect. So just keep that in mind. Now, Siri totem has the highest DPME for a single target. And it's a
Fire
single target
totem.
dot, so it can only attack one target at a time. And its spell coefficient is 6.4%. So
The
it receives
spell
approximately 6.4%
begins
of your
totem
plus
does
spell
not
power.
crit.
Magma totem receives 2.8%
Also, and this one goes to
of your
anyone on
spell
the stream
power, and
for
its DPME
free.
is relatively low compared to Siri totem, but remember,
Anything
if
you
you
have, because then you
multiply
continue
the
streaming
amount
and
of targets
thanks to
you're
someone
attacked
figure that
by
you're a
those single
woman.
target DPME,
Ah.
you get to understand how mana efficient you can really be
Well.
for protecting multiple targets. The same story goes for
I
fire
mean,
totem. Those DPME values seem very, very
that would be
low.
a pretty
In fact,
cool
the
gimmick,
lowest on this
actually.
table. However, the more targets you're attacking, the more
I mean,
mana efficient it becomes. And it receives 8.3% of your total spell power.
a
So it
hat?
receives
What kind of
4%
hat?
out of the fire totems.
Like, what kind of hat
on the
specifically
topic of
would a
totems,
dude wear?
Let's talk about some advanced totem mechanics that I did not cover in the
Looks
classic
like a
WoW
baseball
Shaman
cap.
Totem Guide. These are mechanics
Cowboy
that
hat?
are more min-maxy and something that most players maybe will not use, but they're very important to know and they're very interesting and they can really increase
Anything
your
that can hide
skill
your
as a
hair.
shaman. So
You
we're
could
going
put on a
over Earthbind
wig.
totem twisting, and some mana spring math. Let's first go over Earthbind kiting. This is a process that was developed by Cargos in his Shaman Leveling Guide. If you haven't checked out that video, definitely check it out. It's a very good video. So what this does is
This conversation is
the amount of
weird.
damage you as a shaman will take soloing in the world. Mob swing timers are usually much faster than yours, especially if you're using a two-handed weapon.
Well, I don't
Getting
think being
heat
weird is a
something
bad
you're
thing,
going to
so,
use if you're
you know.
only using two-handers. It works the best with the slower
Anything
the
that can
two-hander
hide your
is.
hair.
Let's look at this image right here. We have you as a shaman in the bottom
Let's
of the
do it.
image. We have your swing timer that hasn't
I
started.
don't think
yet.
so.
We have an Earthbind totem in the middle, and we have
Not
this
exactly.
boar you're going to be attacking. So what's going to happen first is that you're going to engage the boar and get closer to him.
Oh,
and you'll
no.
notice that the Earthbind debuff will show up.
Do you have the
So,
stuff to
step one
dress
is you're
like a
gonna
guy?
trade hits with the boar. You're going to hit the boar's going to hit you, and your swing timer
I don't
will start
typically have guy
to
stuff.
fill up. And when that fills up
Your
all
friends
the
on
way,
this
you'll
stream.
swing again. So think of
Very
it as a
nice, thank
cooldown.
you.
So what you're going to
Good
do
luck
as soon as
with
you trade hits,
your
you're going
stuff.
to strafe to your right or
Your
left.
future
doesn't matter where you
endeavors.
right in this example, and you're going to strafe to your right and let that swing timer start filling up. The reason why you're strafing and not turning around is that you do not want to give them on your back, because if you give them your back, you have the chance of receiving the daze mechanic, which will slow your moving speed as well. So make sure you always have yourself facing the mob, strafing, not backpedaling or turning around. Remember, the
It's
boar is moving 50%
a good idea.
slower than you are, so
Thank
you're going to
you.
move much faster and farther.
Thank you,
than
Juki
it.
Halik.
Your swing timer reaches about 75% full. You're going to immediately strafe in the other
It would
direction
be
towards
pretty
the boar.
funny to
So
see.
now this image is showing you strafing in the other direction.
Look at the swing strafing.
strafing towards the boar again, and you'll eventually
see?
hit the boar when your swing timer is at 100%, and you'll trade hit for hit again, and the swing timer will start counting up again. And then you're going to strafe in the other direction, and then you're going to rinse and repeat. What you're doing is you're strafing back and
Showing you
forth,
how to be
trading
successful.
hit for hit with that boar, so you're taking much less damage. Let's use an extreme example.
Take less damage. Give more critical damage.
Normally you would take a hit every
Do the
2 seconds
healings.
before, but now you're taking one every 4 seconds. You're literally cutting the damage you're taking in half. That's an extreme
Oh,
example.
yeah.
And it can go less than that, like maybe 30%.
That is a
So
good
what
idea.
would it feel like in Cargos' words, to walk around with a buff saying that
Or
you take
maybe a
30%,
BB.
50% less damage. That's huge. You're going to drink less, you're going to heal less, you're going to prepare less. It has a lot of benefits. You are losing out on DPS if you're not using Strength of Earth Totem, but if you're worried about money, if you're worried about drinking and spending money on water, this may be a process you want to try. So definitely give it a shot. It works really well. It takes a little bit of time to get used to, timing-wise, but when that swing timer is out, 75% off cooldown, you want to start strafing back towards the mob and then strafe right through them in the other direction, and then start drinking back in the other direction. Just make sure you get yourself a really good swing timer add-on so you know exactly when your swings are going to be off cooldown so you can really maximize this technique. This cartoon here is basically showing every shaman and a reaper. You're probably going to be healing as a shaman. And if you're in the melee group, your melee DPS are going to maximize their DPS as much as they can. And Wind Fury is amazing. And that's most of the cases you're going to be dropping Wind Fury straight for to make sure that they have the highest DPS possible. But are you really doing the best you can? The answer is technically no. Wind Fury and Grace of Air Totem, which increases agility, which in turn can increase attack depending on classes are in that group.
There's a troll and an orc.
You're going to say Melderon, but these are both air totems. How can I give both of these buffs at the same time? Let me explain how. It's kind of tricky, it's mana expensive, it has a lot of actions per minute, and I'll argue why Rest of Shaman may not be the best shaman to pull this off. It may be an enhancement shaman, which enhancement shamans out here if you want to raid. If you can master this technique, you may get a raid spot. I'm not going to guarantee it, but you can make an argument. So listen up. You probably don't notice this a lot because you're getting Wind Fury from the totem and you don't care about the duration because it immediately refreshes every 6 to 7 seconds when the totem technically pulses. However, if you ever walked out of Wind Fury's range, you may see that you still have the buff for a while until it counts down. In actuality, the Wind Fury buff lasts 10 seconds, and that just keeps getting refreshed over and over again as long as you're in the totem's range, as long as the totem is up. But if you drop Wind Fury totem and then immediately drop another air totem, you'll notice that you'll still have Wind Fury, and it'll still count down. Let's look at this chart. You have time going across the screen on the big green arrow. Okay, that's just time in general. And that time is broken up into 1 second segments by those white vertical lines, those small white vertical lines above the green arrows. Each interval between 2 white lines is 1 second. So at time equals 0, that's the time when this timeline starts, you're going to drop Wind Fury Totem. Now, all totems cause a global cooldown to elapse. So 1.5 second global cooldown will elapse. As soon as that global
I like how
elapses,
when they
you're gonna
write
drop
out
Grace
the
of Air
trolls
Totem.
dialect,
You'll
the
immediately notice that
trolls
you'll have the Grace of Air Totem
dialogue,
buff
he
and
says
the Wind
man.
Fury
Like I
buff.
thought you were just bullshitting when you were.
So technically you're getting
I thought you were full of shit.
Nah, man.
No, they actually wrote the man. Oh my god.
where you'll have Grace of Air and you'll have Wind Fury. Right before
We got like
or at the
15
moment
minutes
the
left
Wind
in
Fury
this.
buff goes off, you're going to put down Wind Fury Totem down again, reinitialize the 10-second buff, wait for the global cooldown to elapse, and then put down Grace of Air. So you'll have 8.5-second intervals of a dual buff, followed by 1.5 second where you only have Wind Fury, followed by another 8.5-second overlap where you have both buffs. This is called totem twisting. It can and will significantly increase the DPS of the melee group you're in. So really, how beneficial can this be? In this chart here, you'll see for each class and each rank of Grace of Air Totem, how much crit, melee attack power, and range
That
attack
makes a lot
power
of
you'll gain by having Grace of Air Totem down.
Makes a lot
Couple
of
this
sense.
with the Wind Fury
Because you
proc
go like
and
this
attack power
once,
bonus of those procs,
drop
you
Wind
can have
Fury,
some really
go.
significant increases in your DPS. Just looking at Grace of Air Totem rank 3, you're going to provide an extra almost 4% crit to
That's why
warriors
it's so
and
critical.
2.7 crit to rogues, and an additional 77 attack power to rogues as well. And that's not even considering how you can also increase DPS on yourself, the shaman in that group, or perhaps you got some feral druid.
Nobody. I was
Which is kinda
not.
rare, but just I put them all in here just in case. So there's a lot of things to twisting, but there's a lot of things we need to talk about here. And the first thing I want to say is that you can also twist
Totem
and Tranquil Air
twisting.
Totem instead of Grace of Air if you're having threat issues. But the big thing here is please make sure that the tank isn't getting the buff from Tranquil Air Totem. This can be hard to do. In larger bosses, it won't be as hard since you're going to be farther away, but you got to really think, if I want to put Tranquil Air Totem down because I'm having some threat issues, it's kind of counterintuitive that you're putting Wind Fury Totem and Tranquil Air Totem down. This isn't something that you're going to use, which is realize that with other air totems you can weave in, not just Grace of Air. You're going to use Grace of Air 99.999% of the time. So, I'm arguing this is an excellent job for enhancement shamans, not resto shamans. There's a few reasons why. Each cycle of dropping Wind Fury followed by Grace of Air is 500 to 560 mana per cycle untalented. Now, it can be reduced to 400 or so-ish mana, but still, that's a lot of mana every 10 seconds. And a healer, you're going to be doing other things as well. You're going to be healing, right? And this takes away from your mana that you're going to use for healing. Also, maybe too many actions per minute for healer. You got to think about healing. You got to think about this totem twisting. It's a lot to think about. I think enhancement shaman are a much better pick here because they're not going to be doing anything but mostly white hitting
maybe weaving in a shock now and again. But you're not going to be using Storm Strike because it takes up a debuff slot. You're not going to use Flame Shock either, so you may just want to throw in a Shock, an Earth Shock, or a Frost Shock every once in a while. And since the bosses are immune to the Frost Shock debuff, it shouldn't be a problem. So mostly you're just going to be using Wind Fury weapon on your weapon, praying for Flurry procs, and just DPSing. So if you have Nightfall and you know how to Totem Twist, you might really get a raid spot here. Is that you are providing that debuff. You may not be the best class to provide that debuff from Nightfall, but since you also can Totem Twist, you may be providing an increase in DPS as well. I would seriously consider, if you want to do this type of thing, get yourself Nightfall and to really learn how to Totem Twist. You may want to consider using gear that has some intellect or AP5 on them, and make sure you get these consumables that I listed on this slide to really help you keep up the Totem Twisting during a long fight. The build I put on the right is the build I would personally use. You notice it does not have parry, it doesn't have Storm Strike, because those things are going to increase the effective totems and give you the chance to proc Flurry and increase your single target two-hander DPS. So those are the most important things you'll need. In the Restoration Tree, you'll increase the mana efficiency and range of your totems, 3% chance to hit, and you'll reduce the threat of your healing spells, and you're probably going to be also possibly giving out a healer or two every once in a while. I put a point in Nature's Swiftness because there may be a situation where like the healers are boom, or they can't get to the tank, and you can provide an instant cast heal in the tank. That could be something you want to think about. You can also put that point of Reincarnation to lower the cooldown of your Ankh. Just your choice, personal choice. I personally think Nature's Swiftness is better. The last thing we're going to talk about as far as advanced totem mechanics is breaking even with mana.